Hey guys, so we are back to our project. As you can see here, I already put some stuff into our views, and I did it for the list view and the detail view for today. And my idea here is I made a huge mess of our views, and we're gonna debug it. We're gonna fix it so it makes sense. But also we're gonna, discuss what it does, and then for the future, you can maybe leave those commented out bits so you know that these fields exist or these functions exist, so you can customize your views and make it work the way you want it to work. My approach here was I went on the generic display views Django documentation and I looked at the flowchart here. I also went through all the mixins that we're using and I looked at the attributes that we can tap into, and I chose the ones that I use myself and I find them very useful. And so I went through this list first. So as you can see here, we have some setup, dispatch, HTTP method not allowed. These first three are a little bit more advanced, and as long as you want to stick to the standard HTTP methods, you don't really want to touch them. But then we get the get template names. So let's go to our code and have a look here. So there are two ways you can pass that information. One, if you have just one place and you're sure that that's going to be your template name, you just use this attribute here. So template name, and if you say, hey, this is going to be my template name, and by default, this is the name because we're using the income model. So it's going to say, hey, I'm a list view. I'm going to use income and list, and that's the default. If you want to change it to something else, you can change it here, but make sure you change it here as well. So it's more like if your template structure is different, that's when you want to say, hey Django, I appreciate you giving me some defaults, but I need to use it in a different way. So I'm going to specify it here. But for more advanced cases, you need to use get template names. So sometimes you need, if it's much more advanced web page, you're checking maybe cookies and you're giving back some template list, and it's just going through those lists. And if it's non-existing, it passes on that. I couldn't find it. I'm going further and I'm looking for my finances income. So if I go to my website here and I refresh, and don't worry about this text, I'm going to tell you what that is in a second. Indeed, it gave me that template, so it works. Okay, but we want to fix it here. Obviously, I don't want this. This doesn't make sense. I'm going to delete that. And if you want, you can leave this in here. If you want, you can say, hey, I'm going to leave a comment saying this is an attribute that I can use if I need to. It's nice to have it because if you don't want to look for documentation and what was the name of that art attribute, you still have it in your code, and code is a perfect place for keeping your notes. Okay. Query set. So let's go back to the documentation, and query set is the next bit. So let's have a look here. Again, you have two ways of passing query set. If you say this, then well, this will come next and overwrite this. So basically you use either an attribute or the function. So this will set this query set to be whatever query set you come up with. In here, I made this funny, hey, I'm gonna take, and by default, it's this. So if we pass model income, then it says, hey, you don't specify what the query set is. I'm gonna just say, give me all, so make all the income objects available to play with. And it's not something you want to do when, for example, you have users and you want specific users to have an access to only their own stuff. You don't want to be like, hey, here's all the income of all the people around and play with it. No, you want to say, hey, filter by user. But since we don't have users yet, I came up with this. So I said, hey, give me all the objects except for ID 19. Why not? And both of these are doing the same thing. So I'm going to comment this out for the moment. And let's go here and refresh. And as you can see, we have 18, we don't have 19. And if I take this, oops, let's just delete this. Okay, and let's go back to our list, and 19 is back. So that's how it works. Again, as I said, we will use this. If it's simple, just, hey, grab the query set by this, then you can use just the attribute, but sometimes you need to get some information from the request, for example. You want to, if you want to check what's in the request or what's available to you, you can check in here. And maybe you want to process some of the stuff that we have available, maybe something from context, maybe something from some other fields, maybe something from cookies, and depending on whatever logic you put in here, then you return something, right? But if it's simple as this, or for now, it's actually just like we're using all, I'm going to delete that for now because we are not deviating from just handling the whole thing. And I can delete this so that we leave the defaults in here. Okay, let me refresh. And if I come back here, we have all the items. 18 and 19 is there. Okay, and I can see 18 and 19 because I added it to income list HTML, and I added this bit in here. Okay, cool. So then we have the get context name and so context object name and get context object name. You can see how this pattern works. You have the attribute name and you have the function that is just like get and the attribute name. So this is for straightforward assignment, and this one is when you want to add some complicated logic based on a bit more than just like, you know, it's just a string. If you want to add like, hey, check cookies, and if cookies say this, then do this, and if it says something else, then do something else. But this is the easy way. So again, let me just delete this, or if you want to comment it out and leave it, go ahead and leave it. But again, if you go to the documentation, it's all in here. So it's not so hard to find it. And just keep in mind that you have that power. That's all you need to do for now. So that was the one that I wanted to check. So income list is the default. And there is a pretty cool thing that I discovered, that you have two different names that you can always use. One is set in here. It's either default, which is the model name underscore list when it comes to the list view, or it's object list. And if I set it to something else, if I set it to dupa, which is a Polish word, take my word for it, and I go to income list, and instead of saying, hey, go through object list, which still works, which if I go here and I refresh, it still works. And if I change this to dupa, and again, refresh, it still works. It's still in here. I can't just pass anything in here. If I say my cat in here, and then again, try to refresh in here, it's gonna say, oh, no stuff. I couldn't find anything in here. So basically this is a wrong name to use. So if I use object list or whatever I set in here, or a default, which is income list, I'm good to go. So let's comment it out. So I'm not setting anything in here, and then let's go here and change it to income list. Let's refresh, and it still works. So it doesn't matter if I use something that we set in here, or is default, or object list, which always works. Good to keep in mind. Object list. Okay. Another thing is extra context. And that was like a huge aha moment for me when I was struggling with going from function-based to class-based views. The tutorial that I was following didn't do something that I'm doing now. So like before going into class-based views, just like going a bit of everything and then use it for our purposes. And I was struggling to understand what the heck is going on. And I was really missing this extra context thing. Extra context is basically like if you go back to air pollution views, we were setting some context here, and then we were passing it in the return. So we were rendering some request here, and we were passing some context in. What happens in class-based views, a lot of that stuff is happening, kind of underneath the hood. So for example, if we put the query set and we put the context object name, it says like, okay, in context, there's going to be something called income list, and it's going to pass this in there. Okay. But what if I want to add some more? What if I want to have something called Marunio 1, and that says hello Marunio, and then we have Marunio 2, and it says what up? So you can just pass it like this. I want something more. If it's something straightforward, again, rule of thumb is if you're using just an attribute, then there's something easy to pass. If you need to use some logic, something more complicated, you need to tap into self or something else, you can still calculate that using get context data. And the way it works is first it checks this, and then it processes this. And the proof of that is that I set Marunio 1 and 2, and there is Marunio 2 here as well, and that's going to be overwritten. So this will be not displayed. And let's go here and refresh. And as you can see, this is Marunio 1. And it says hello Marunio, as I did in my code. And then we have Marunio says hello. So that's the string from here. So it overwrites the stuff that is being said in here. So just keep in mind that that's the way it works. But obviously we don't want to use any of that. So I'm going to delete this. And by the way, you can see this here. I should mention that This is important here. So basically we have to go with this. Otherwise we don't get all the different data. So let me just go and say, hey, data is some empty dictionary. So, and let's go and let's refresh. And there's nothing to show because we didn't gather the default context, which is the query set. We didn't get that using super and then get context data with all the keyword arguments. So that's the way you kind of say, hey, do whatever you always do, plus also do this. Okay. So let's leave it like this. And obviously you want to delete this. We can, again, you can comment it out and leave it for the future. So you have all the syntax here with super and all if you don't feel very comfortable with it, but I'm going to get rid of it just for the sake of organization. I'll just leave this in here. And also I'll clean this up because I'm not using this anymore. Okie doke. And the last one is here, get. So one thing is if we don't allow empty, so we say allow empty false, it's going to give us an error when there is nothing to show. So let's, for example, change this to something like filter ID, I don't know, 10,000. So we don't have that. So the query set will be empty. And then what's going to happen is we're going to get some boo-boo. Cool. Okay. Page not found, empty list. So here, allow empty is false and you're getting an error. So we don't allow to show anything because it's empty. So let me just go back on that. And okay, so let's do it again. Let's make it empty and let's make it true. Let's go back, refresh, and it allows me to say, hey, nothing to show because we changed that to true. Useful, maybe. Think of uses of for that. For now, I don't know why would I not allow it, but anyway, I can leave it commented out. This get here is basically because it's a list view, it only allows you to do like a get HTTP request. You can't post to list view. You can't, put, you can't delete. You only get from the list view. So you can say whenever a get request is being done to this view, do this. So in here we say, hey, super, whatever you do, just do that. But before, do this. I don't know. I have some logs. So make a log, right? So you create a function that makes a log somewhere in your logs, and then you know like, okay, that happened. Okay, maybe you can just print something. Print hello world. Okay, let's make this a little bit longer or higher. You go away. Okay, let's go and refresh. Nothing really happened, but if you go here, you can see hello world. Okay, so we did something, and whatever, if you want to like keep it in a database somewhere, send something to database every time you go to get, sure, you can do that. So that's how you overwrite get function, and that's how you keep your function. So if you don't want to like completely change it, if you want like, yeah, do whatever you do, and that's what it says, but before do something. The opposite was, and I can scroll here because I was doing the same for this guy. The opposite happens in here. We say first like, hey, store in data whatever usually you return, okay? Then I'm going to do something with that data, and then I'm going to return it. There are different ways of using super. But anyway, for now, we don't need that. I still can go to my documentation and check all the methods here, and they're kind of descriptive. So whatever, like, oh, what was the get query set? Oh, it's here. It's kind of easy to find them. Here we have render to response. Again, a little bit advanced. I don't see how we are utilizing this one yet, so I'm gonna just skip that one, but give it a go if you want to know what that does. Read it and maybe check some. StackOverflow is great for examples. So what I sometimes do is like, what is this guy? What does it do? I just copy this and I go to I just do Django and paste this, and then I look for the, one of the StackOverflow articles. This one is pretty old, but sometimes they still hold. It's good to find newer ones though. Anyway, so I'm gonna leave it as it is. Let's very quickly go to the detail view. A lot of it is the same. So template name, again, exactly the same. So I'm gonna just delete this. We don't need to, but I just put it there so you know, like, yeah, you can do the same thing. And again, you can find it in here. All of those functions or the methods are here. Then we have the query set. It works a little bit different. So when it comes to ListView, you get the query set, so then it's being passed to the template, and then we can go through it and so on. In here, it's kind of like, why would you get the query set for just a single object? In here, you want to make sure that this view has an access to only the query set that you allow it to have an access to. So again, if you're user 123, right, you don't want to say like, hey, give an access to all of the incomes. No, you want to say, hey, I want to filter by user ID. You put your ID in here. Obviously, you get it programmatically, so it wouldn't be 123. You'll probably go here and be like, hey, give me a user that is logged in, and then pass ID in here. And that's how we say, hey, for sure, whatever happens here, that user has an access only to the stuff that he is supposed to, or she is supposed to have an access to. Okay, so but as by default, for now, we have an access to everything. Because we don't have users, we need to stick to it. But let's have a look here. Let's what happens if I say, hey, query set is filter only 18. So if I go here, in here, and if I go to 18, everything went well. We got the object by the PK, and that's the data that we got back. What if I want to go to 19? 19 says, hey, income matching query does not exist. So why? There is 19, but when I came here, it didn't work because we set the query set to be only 18, ID 18 and nothing else. It really just holds like one item, and then I get this one, the query set that has just this one item, and I say, hey, from this query set that has only one item, get me something of the PK that was passed, which is 19, and it didn't work. Let me just put a breakpoint here and refresh. And indeed, if you check this, evaluate, it does give you 19. And by the way, it's a string, but that's okay. You can pass it to ID, which is an integer. But we are getting 19, which is not 18, and it doesn't work. If I change this to, obviously, it should be all by default for now. Okay, let's go in here and refresh. 19 is indeed showing. So 18 and 19 both work. Okay, so I kind of showed you both get query set and get object, which are slightly different. So get object is only determining which object, single object, is supposed to be taken from the query set that we're passing in here. Okay, so but if I delete this, and by the way, yeah, that was default. So if I don't have it there and I still do something crazy like filter ID only 18 and check that out, refresh, 18 works, 19 doesn't, because there is no matching query as expected. Okay, so I'll just delete this. We still have the documentation. That's just to keep in mind that we have those fields there. Context object name, the same thing. If we want something straightforward, then we are using this, and we wouldn't use something that is so complex. And then because we can add a bit more logic here, but if we need some logic here, then we can use the function, right? And if I change that to something else, let's say change it to dupa again, and let's go to detail here. And for now, we're using income. And by the way, that was something that I missed it. And I was like using object and then income. It did work. I didn't notice that I was using two different variables, but they both worked because this one is like, it always works. And this one was default. But now I overwritten that default. So let's see what's going to happen when I refresh. So nothing is showing. Income doesn't work. But let's change the date to dupa, which is a Polish word. And yeah, so let's refresh. And the date works. The rest doesn't. So I overwritten this income. Okay. And I don't want to overwrite it, so I'm going to just delete this. So now, extra context. Again, if you want to add some extra stuff in there, you can do it by passing some straightforward stuff, or if you want to do some magic in here. Let's put a breakpoint in here and have a look what happens when we get to get context data. And this is what we get from super. So this is what by default it does. It gets the object, which we discussed before, and income. So this is the default name, and this is the always happening name, and these are exactly the same objects. And then we have some information about the view, which is kind of cool to know that we have an access to it in our templates. And then it takes any stuff that we put in extra context, and then additionally, if you want to add some, let's see, we get Marunia here, and we added it by adding it here. But obviously, if you want to calculate something or maybe grab something from different model, from different database table, you can still do it and pass it in context. So that's something that I really missed when I moved from function-based to class-based views, and it's pretty powerful. So keep in mind that you have that power there. Okay, okay, so I'm gonna delete this because it's easy to find, and I'll just keep it as a reminder like this. Okay, but we're back to our defaults because we don't really need any other stuff going on. The list view and detail view, since we are still not using authentication and users, we don't really have to change anything in here, but we will in the future. Okay, so I'm gonna finish here, and next time we're gonna have a look exactly the same way on what can we do with those create, update, and delete views. Okay, thanks for watching, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.